It operates on almost all of us, in almost every area of our lives, usually without us ever noticing it's happening. And interestingly enough, Alicent Hightower from House of Dragon is the same. She's the queen consort of the Seven Kingdoms in House of Dragon. She was placed inside that role before she was old enough to understand what it would cost. Married as a teenager to a grieving king twice her age, handed children, handed a crown, handed a function she never auditioned for. And somewhere in the process of surviving all that, she stopped asking whether any of it was what she really wanted. She started asking instead how to protect what she'd already paid for. By the time we're watching her, Alicent has spent decades doubling down on her son's claims, on decisions she made under pressure that she can no longer fully justify, on a war she helped start for reasons she can no longer fully articulate without acknowledging that those reasons were tangled up with fear and grief and a father who used her as a tool before she had the language to recognize it. She's not a villain. She's a person who went too far in one direction and discovered that reversing course would cost more than she could make herself pay. You already know this dynamic. The context is just different. Here's what actually happens when you're invested too much in something to walk away from it. You don't just stay, you start working to justify the staying. The mind does this automatically, without asking permission. Every piece of new evidence that the thing isn't working gets reframed, minimized, explained away. Every exit gets evaluated not against what's possible, but against everything that's already been spent. The more you've spent, the higher that bar gets. Behavioral economist Barry Staw studied this for years, and he called it escalation of commitment. The documented human tendency to pour more resources into a failing course of action specifically because of what you've already put in. That sounds like a lot of governments. What that means in plain language is that the investment you made yesterday is actively distorting the decision you're trying to make today. The sunk cost doesn't just sit there, it votes. Watch Alicent with her son Aegon. She knows he's impulsive. She knows he's unsuited for what she's put him in. She can see it clearly. She's one of the sharpest people in any room she enters. And she keeps defending him anyway. Not because she's deluded, because stopping now means indicting everything that came before the defense started. It means looking back at the years of maneuvering, the friendships burned, the moral lines crossed, and saying, I did all of that for something that wasn't worth it. That verdict is not one she can make herself deliver. Maybe not with a son on a throne, but with something. The business you kept funding past the point of reason. The person you kept explaining to your friends, kept finding new ways to see more charitably. The version of yourself you'd built your whole identity around that was starting to crack at the edges, and you kept patching it rather than asking whether the structure itself needed to change. What makes Alicent's situation so recognizable is that her original choices weren't irrational. She was young, and she was cornered, and she did what she could with what she had. That's true. The tragedy isn't the first choice, it's the next one, and the one after that. Each one a little more locked in than the last until the whole architecture of her life depends on none of it being questioned. There's something underneath the commitment, though. Something that makes the sunk cost calculus feel even more personal and even more painful. Alicent isn't fighting for power, not really. She's fighting for her children. And that means the investment isn't time or status or political capital, it's love. And love is the most irrational form of prior investment there is. Because when you tell someone that what they sacrificed everything to protect wasn't worth protecting, you're not just telling them they were wrong, you're telling them that their love was wrong, that the fear was misplaced, that the vigilance was wasted. And that's not a correction, that's a gutting. She keeps adjusting the story, keeps finding a frame that lets the next terrible thing get absorbed without requiring her to take the whole account apart and start over. Staw's research has a particularly sharp finding here. People escalate hardest when they were the ones who made the original call. When the decision was yours, reversing it means condemning yourself. And most people will do almost anything to avoid that. This is where it gets uncomfortable to watch, because this is where it gets uncomfortably close to home. The pattern Alicent is living inside, the one that keeps her moving forward in a direction she privately knows is wrong, isn't a character flaw unique to queens and fantasies about dragons. It's a feature of how human beings process investment and identity and loss. The research is unambiguous on this. We are not rational about the things we've already paid for. But there's one more layer, and it's the one that makes Alicent genuinely hard to dismiss. Her identity has become so fused with her role, queen, mother, protector of the green, that she can no longer clearly locate who she is without it. The Alicent who existed before all of this, who had a genuine friendship before it was weaponized, who read to a dying king in the quiet hours with something that might have been real, that person has been so thoroughly buried under function that a threat to the function feels like a threat to existence itself. Psychologists call this identity foreclosure, when a person's sense of self becomes so fused with a particular commitment or role, they can't imagine surviving outside of it. You've probably felt a version of this. The job title that became a personality, the relationship that became the primary mirror you used to know yourself. The belief you defended so many times in public that admitting doubt felt less like changing your mind and more like losing the thread of who you were. When everything Alicent has built starts to come apart, when her sons stop listening, when her influence narrows, when Aegon's kingship becomes something she can't defend even to herself, she doesn't just lose power. She loses the architecture of her identity. And that's not political, that's existential. That's the specific vertigo of realizing that the thing you organize yourself around might not be the thing you actually are. The green dress at the beginning, the one she wears as a declaration, the one that turns a wedding feast into a war, is not ambition. It's a woman who has decided that the cost of stopping is higher than the cost of going forward. And she's made the calculation so many times by now that she's stopped noticing she's making it. Most of us make it too, just more quietly, just without the cameras. You're more like Alicent Hightower than you realize, not in the scale of what she's done, in the mechanism, in the way a single choice made under pressure, in a moment when you didn't have all the information and didn't have all the options, can become the foundation for the next choice and the one after that, until you're defending a structure you built so long ago you can't remember what you were trying to protect with it anymore. In the way love, the most real thing you have, can become the reason you can't see clearly. In the way identity can fuse with role until a crisis of one becomes a crisis of the other. But before it was that, it was a woman standing in front of a wardrobe, deciding that the cost of stopping was more than she could pay. We make that calculation more often than we'd like to admit. The question is whether we're making it or whether, by now, it's making us. If you'd like to see me do this treatment for one of your favorite characters, post it in the comments. And be sure to check out some of my novels in the link in the description and in the pinned comment. And if you enjoyed this video, then I think you'll really enjoy this one about Kingpin.